Fantasy basketball playoffs are here. Let's recap week 19 and look ahead at the mayhem to come for week 20. Hey guys, Andrew from Angle here. I am your host and one of the analysts over at Angle Fantasy Basketball. If you want to check out all of our content, please be sure to visit our website, anglefantasybasketball.wordpress.com. Also be sure to follow us on Twitter at AngleFantasyBB. Be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel if you are new. So, fantasy basketball playoffs are here. If you are in a league with what we like to call the proper settings, your fantasy basketball playoffs are going to begin in week 20. However, there is some dynasty leagues that I myself, as well as my co-host today, Braxton, are in, where our dynasty league playoffs began in week 19. So first off, Braxton, how you doing, buddy?
Good, man. I'm feeling good. It's always nice. One of the best feelings fantasy basketball is advancing in the playoffs, right? And all the 30 teams, all the 30 team leagues that I'm in, I was fortunate enough to advance past the first round. So the stress follows me at least one more week for those. Just because you're so much more attached to your dynasty leagues than your basketball leagues, right? How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, man. I'm doing pretty good. And I 100% agree with that statement. The dynasty leagues have so much more of an attachment because you're with these leagues year round. So things have been going pretty well for me in the dynasty leagues, of which I was competing for a playoff spot and did make the playoffs. I moved on in each of those leagues as well too. So looks like it's a successful start for you and I for dynasty so far. Before our redraft leagues, which are going to begin playoffs in week 20. How's that been looking for you? So we ran 3 redraft leagues within the Angle server this year. I got second seed in one of them for myself. Looks like I'm going to miss out on playoffs by 1 game, which would be in our Yahoo League. And then you are commissioning our other Yahoo League, which had the auction draft. How are things looking for you in that one?
It's awesome, man. I love that league. 11 out of the 12 people were super active all season long. Even when they got knocked out of it, they were still making moves and lineup changes. So that's something you'd love to see. I was able to manage to get myself into the first seed, so I'm kind of coasting for week 20. With fantasy basketball playoffs, there's so much brain power I think that goes into it compared to some other sports. So it's nice to be able to almost relax for a week and still knowing you're advancing. So
Absolutely agree. Bye weeks are very, very important in those redraft leagues, especially if you are dealing with some injuries. So speaking of injuries, we do need to talk about a couple of them. We had a big one today. Alperen Sengun. Seems like there was a significant knee and ankle injury that happened to him. So looking at the Rockets roster, the obvious candidates who would have filled in the absence for Sengun are currently also sidelined. That'd be like Steven Adams and Tari Eason. So Brax, who do you think is there going to be a clear winner for the Rockets here in the absence of Sengun, or is it just going to be kind of an even minutes dispersal with no one really worth taking a flyer on for, let's say a 12-team fantasy league?
yeah, I mean, if Cam Whitmore was dropped in your league, I think that's somebody. I think he might be able to kind of not soar, but maybe rise back to the highs he was on for a couple weeks. Maybe they shift Jabari Smith up to center, and that frees up some minutes for Cam Whitmore. I do think Fred VanVleet is going to see some increased usage as well. Might just have the ball in his hands a little bit more. In Toronto, when he has the ball in his hands incredibly often, he was, an elite fantasy asset. So, Jock Landale enter the rotation most likely. Jeff Green will enter the rotation most likely, or re-enter the rotation, I should say. Jeff Green, I don't think it's a pickup anywhere. I mean, he'll get you like 8 points and 1 board or something like that. Jock Landale, if he plays, excuse me, 16 to 20 minutes a night, I could see him being like a 16 team pickup. But anything beyond that, I just don't think he gets there. I don't think they're gonna play him enough for him to warrant 12 team consideration.
So, another significant injury that happened that seems like it does have a clear winner was the injury to Karl Anthony Towns. So the clear winner here from that injury was going to be Naz Reid. So a couple of nights ago, Naz Reid dropped 34 points. Currently in the Lakers game, where it is the second quarter, he has 21 points. So did you manage to grab Naz Reid in any of the leagues that you were in?
Well, that's a lot of points. What's so funny about Naz Reid is the one league I had him in, I actually dropped him the day Karl Anthony Towns got injured. Before that game started, I dropped him to activate
Oh,
somebody else. With the thought, so this is kind of an interesting dynamic here. Week 20, which is the first round of the playoffs for a lot of teams, or a lot of leagues rather, the Timberwolves only have two games, and you know, if this could be really interesting to see how these guys who spend their top waiver priority or dropped the rest of their fab on him, because there's not a lot of hot pickups this late in the season, right? So how they fare with him, right? Because they might have like a sunk cost fallacy type thing where it's like, okay, they play on Tuesday and then they don't play again until Saturday, right? So is the two games of Naz Reid outweigh like a four games of somebody like Delano Banton? I don't know. Probably not. And I don't know. I'm not saying this is going to actually hurt those owners, but they might be a little bit more reluctant to drop him than they normally would with anybody else. So if you're playing against somebody that has Nas Reed, I wouldn't be worried about it, to be honest with you.
yeah, that's a pretty good point. With the 2 game week coming up, that is definitely going to be a pretty big factor. All right. So speaking of 2 game weeks, we need to talk about our 4s and 2s for week 20. So there looks like some good opportunity for streaming as well as a couple of teams to avoid. So for starters, let's go over all of the teams that are going to be playing 4 times this week. That's going to be the Celtics, the Hornets, the Bulls, the Mavericks, the Nuggets, the Pistons, the Clippers, the Suns, the Blazers, the Spurs, the Raptors, and the Wizards. Now looking at, there's going to be 2 teams that are playing only 2 times during week 20. So some of the peripheral players that are on the waiver wire might not be a great stream choice this week. And that's going to be the Los Angeles Lakers and the Minnesota Timberwolves. We have 3 low volume days. So what we consider to be low volume days are any days that have less than 7 games occurring. That's going to be Monday, Thursday, and Friday. So Braxton, looking ahead to week 20 of the fantasy basketball season, which is going to be week 1 of playoffs for most people, is there any specific teams that you really like as a potential streaming target to get your week started off strong?
Yeah, so a lot of times, a lot of times people are looking for 4 game weeks, right? So what I'm looking for specifically this week is teams that have 4 game weeks that start on Monday and end on Saturday. And those two teams are there's 3 teams that way. The Bulls, the Hornets, and the Blazers. Now, the Bulls don't really have anybody streamable at this point. It's unlikely anybody who's on their team is on your waiver wire unless you're like in a 10-team league. Look out for Caruso, Sunmu if he's still available in your league somehow. But the Hornets and the Blazers have a couple really streamable guys. The Hornets especially. Vasil Micic is somebody I'm really liking this week with that Monday, Saturday schedule. Trey Mann is banged up. He's been starting at point guard. Cody Martin is still injured. Micic is getting all of the usage he wants. Now, in terms of his 9-cat ranking, it's not. It's not the best, but I feel like there's no need to overanalyze 9-cat ranking when it comes to playoffs. For me, and I feel this way this season more so than any. I'm really just looking at the actual stats as opposed to 9-cat ranking. I think sometimes it can lead you down a bad path to maybe take a player that's not impacting your team as much. So yeah, I like Mitch's. The assist upside is can't really find it anywhere else on the wire. I think he's only 25% owned on Yahoo at this point. If your playoffs start this week, I'm grabbing Micic because and this is why I like this Monday through Saturday schedule. Sometimes people look at 4 game weeks starting on Tuesday, right? So you get the Monday game, and then you can drop the guy you played on Monday, and then you have the Tuesday for the rest of the week, right? But this is kind of the inverse of that, where you get the Monday, and then on Saturday, you're looking at your matchup and you know exactly what you need to advance, right? As far as stats, you can target specific types of players on that Sunday, and you're getting 5 games out of a slot on only one move, and you have the benefit of the added knowledge of how your matchup is faring, right? But anyways, another guy that I like on the Hornets is Brent Williams. Again, not really the best 9 cat guy. I think he's something like 198 over the last 2 weeks. But if you look at the stat lines, right? Look at the stat lines. Ignore the field goal percentage. It's not going to hurt you as much as you think it will. I don't think unless you have like this crazy specific punting 4 cat build. He's a double threat every night. He's getting threes. He's getting stocks. He's out there. He's playing significant minutes. He's somebody I really like as well on this Hornets team. The Hornets are kind of just trying everything right now. In terms of lineups and stuff. One more guy that I like is Delano Banton this week. He's only owned in 25% of Yahoo leagues. By the way, Grant Williams only 28% of Yahoo leagues. So he should be widely available as well. Banton only 25%, even with the games he's been putting up recently, Andrew. I don't know if you've seen what he's been doing, but it's like it's crazy, like first option type stuff. And last game with Ayton and Scoot back in the lineup, I was expecting a dip in minutes and usage. But if I'm not mistaken, that was the most minutes he had played all season and maybe in his career. I think it was 40 last game. We just double check that real quick. Yeah, 42 minutes last game. That's a career high for him. 5 threes, 25 points, 7 rebounds, 4 assists, and a block. And he started. I don't know if he's going to start rest of season. I don't know.
Silly season's going on in Portland for sure.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Although they could try the Scoot Henderson Simons thing, but Banton, if you own him already, fantastic sign for him to continue to see this big usage and big minutes, even with Scoot and Ayton back in the lineup. I know Scoot was on a minutes limit, but Ayton played 40 minutes. Not that Banton plays center, right? But that stuff kind of trickles down because I think they were giving it wasn't like a strict 2-man rotation at center. I think they were shifting some guys up and things like that. So yeah, those guys, those are some of the guys I really like. And like I mentioned, you can drop them on Sunday for somebody that you know that you need instead of, just kind of guessing on Monday or Tuesday what stats you need. Sorry, I know I rambled there. Andrew, do you have any thoughts about the streaming?
No. You absolutely, I love it. Very, very useful information. I mean, people that are looking ahead to week 20 to prepare for the playoffs, they need to know about names like that. Absolutely. So, that covers a bit for the schedule wise of week 2, but just a couple other things that we wanted to go over, just some general advice and tips for preparing for fantasy basketball playoffs. So I want to talk about you top seeds out there, you 1 and 2 seeds, where for starters, let me just say this as a general rule of thumb. It's a really good just practice in general. Now that you're in fantasy basketball playoffs, just review your league settings. You need to review specific rules and parameters, things that you can, for one, potentially take advantage of, and things that, two, you should really know, such as what your tiebreaker decisions are, what the tiers of your tiebreakers are in your league too. But the one thing I want to talk about for you teams out there that have a bye, you're in a really good position, because if you have some guys that have some short-term injuries, like let's say you're a 1 seed or a 2 seed and you have Jalen Johnson on your team. Well, now instead of rushing to drop him to pick up a healthy body to prepare for playoffs, you have a week to see how things go. So you want to make sure, for starters, that you're aware if your league offers a bye for you or not, if you're the 1 or 2 seed currently in your league. And if you do have a bye, you need to really assess what the timeline might look like for some of your injured players. You might get your currently injured players back next week once your opponent is decided after this week. So byes are for sure something you need to pay attention to. But also, when you're on a bye, that doesn't mean that you get the week off. You still should be actively viewing the waiver wire, trying to hop on a good opportunity when it presents itself. But you do also, like I mentioned, have the opportunity to play it safe with some guys who have a shorter timeline. Obviously, some guys who have some significant injuries, you could move on for healthy bodies, but there are some important players out there that only have a short-term injury. Another thing to keep in mind too is that it is sometimes possible. Some leagues do this, not all. Most of the time, that leagues that do this are going to be leagues on fan tracks where you kind of get to stash players in the injured slot without punishment. You don't get forced into an illegal lineup, and sometimes you can still make roster moves when you're stashing a player in your injury reserve slot too. So again, this is something that you really need to closely review your league settings, whether if you're on Yahoo, Fantrax, or Sleeper. Closely review your league settings. Try to see if there are basically loopholes in the settings that you can exploit that can give you an advantage. Like I said, stashing players in injured reserve. If you're in a Fantrax or Sleeper league that has minors players, if you're able to stash these types of minors players and have them come into play for you during a pivotal matchup or at some point. And then, like I mentioned earlier, being well aware of what your league's tiebreakers are too. So, Brax, do you have any other just general advice or tips that you wanted to offer for fantasy basketball playoffs?
Yeah, and it kind of to bounce off what you said. If you are starting this week, you don't have a bye. There's almost literally no reason to hold guys who are banged up or injured if they're
Agreed.
going to actively negatively affect your outlook in the playoffs, right? There's no point in stashing somebody if you're going to be eliminated. So and the same thing goes for, well, I think the overarching theme here for me is to be super aggressive when it comes to adds and drops and spending fab or using your waiver priority. Don't save it for something that may never come. I spoke about Naz Reid's schedule earlier. If I'm the Naz Reid owner, I'm strongly considering dropping him after Tuesday because there's no, and depending on how your matchup goes, and there's a lot of context that comes into play here, right? But there's no point in stashing guys for something that may not come. I mean, I just said it. This is something I think people get really hung up on. If anybody's holding LaMelo still, you need to drop him, right? Any of these guys that are if you're running out of injured spots and you have like LaMelo, Bane, Marcus Smart, guys like that who still may or may not return, just cut them. It's
Yeah.
fine. You need you're never gonna like look back on your old teams and be like, oh man, but I had LaMelo and he was injured, right? You cut him, advance in the playoffs, win the money, forget it. Like if LaMelo comes back for one game at the end of the year, great, right? But you got, 15 games worth out of somebody else. Yeah, so I guess to summarize, just be aggressive. Don't be afraid to spend your fab. Don't be afraid to use your waiver priority. Don't be afraid to drop guys. If guys like sprain an ankle, and you're not gonna be able to get them in an injured spot. You're out of injured spots. Just cut bait. Unless it was super minor and they return in a do or die situation. That's where a lot of people slip up. I feel like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, holding on to people too long, kind of just wasting the opportunity of being aggressive. Because, like we mentioned earlier, silly season is underway for majority of teams, and what we mean by silly season is players who are not normally going to get regular rotation minutes throughout the course of the NBA season are going to start to see heavy rotation minutes from here towards the end of the season. So the last, 5 to 6 weeks here of the season. So those are the guys you need to pay attention to. Like we saw a big performance out of Dean Wade over in Cleveland. You can find, in the deepest of leagues, there's going to be specific guys that are signed to 10-day contracts that might be useful to you too. There's guys that are going to step up in the place of injured starters. Like, for example, silly season's also going on in Utah. Lauri Markkanen's been out. So if you were in a super deep league, you might have seen Lucas Samanic on the waiver wire and could be utilizing him too. So there's a lot of possibilities to replace these injured stars for yourself, especially if these stars are ones that are on teams that have plenty of incentive to tank.
Yeah, and one more thing I want to add is, in the vein of being aggressive, right? I would expect other teams to behave this way. It's something you need to keep an eye on. There will be good players that get dropped by other teams.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it be for a bad schedule, the minor injury, and if you're in a position where you can afford to hold somebody and they miss a game, that's how leagues are won, in my opinion, right? Championship week, your opponent drops Kristaps Porzingis for the back-to-back. I don't think they have a back-to-back in most championship leagues, but they dropped him for the back-to-back. They needed the spot so bad. And then by the time he's off waivers, you grabbed him. Boom, you just got a free game from Kristaps Porzingis. So that's just something that you really want to keep an eye on the transaction list, the history rather. And I've said it 20 times, but just be aggressive.
Yep, be aggressive, but also, take advantage of some people being aggressive or potentially even being overly aggressive, because that is a possibility here too.
A lot
So
of shifting of top players here towards the end.
Exactly. So there's a lot that can go on in these leagues. So as we talked about, there's just kind of just a higher difficulty level and just a higher skill level that's also going to take place the later and later you get into the fantasy rounds too. So there's going to be lots of opportunity to take advantage of, guys who are not well known and have barely played throughout the season, as well as top stars who would normally never be on a waiver wire, but all of a sudden they appear on a waiver wire because their owner had to be super aggressive just to try to make it on to the next round. All right, so that covers looking ahead to week 20, but let's look back to week 19 once again. We're going to review Braxton's buy sell for week 19. So it's great to have the man himself with us now. So every week on Monday, Braxton puts out a written article covering buys and sells for the redraft season for that week. You can find that
Dynasty
on...
too.
Huh?
Dynasty as well.
Oh, Dynasty too. Yep, that's very true. And you can find that on anglefantasybasketball.wordpress.com. Normally comes out every Monday during the fantasy basketball season. So Brax, I'm going to hand it off to you. On the screen here, we got your number one buy for the week, as well as what your number one sell was. But there's a few more guys listed on there as well. So let's hear about it.
Yeah, McBride was just a direct. Obviously, Jalen Brunson came back way earlier than expected when I wrote the article. McBride, he's definitely somebody to stick on your watch list. And if you see Brunson or maybe even DiVincenzo go down with an injury, I think he might become a pickup again. But in redraft leagues for now, I would hold off on McBride. Somebody else I did write earlier last week, and I would recommend them for this coming week as well is Grant Williams. I talked about him with that elite schedule, that Monday through Saturday 4-game week schedule. He's just racking up counting stats right now. He's not. And again, like I mentioned, the 9-cat rank really isn't there for him, but the counting stats are just so usable, and he's available in the vast majority of leagues. So he is somebody I still like moving forward. I did have Ashton Hagans on there as well. He's a two-way guard in Portland. He was getting a lot of playing time as a result of Scoot Henderson being injured. I didn't foresee the Delano Banton I don't know, breakout is the right word.
Yeah, that was a crazy one.
Yeah, I do still like Hagans if they decide, but if Simons or Scoot Henderson gets injured again, or maybe or he gets banged up and they start to sit it back to back or something, Hagans could be a good one game strain. He's got that ability to rack up stats, assists, steals, and even a block in there on a couple of nights. So for the sell, Andrew, what is that? You put a 0 next to Gafford? What is that?
Okay, so the way that I put it out, I put it in the order of what you would typically see a 9-category fantasy line. Yes, exactly. So, it's always field goals, free throws, threes, points, rebounds, assists, steals, blocks. So it's probably good I explain it out this way because it looks like just a random bunch of numbers. So I have the threes out front. So don't mind the 0.
Is that over the last week?
For Gaff, huh?
Is that over the last week, those stats?
Yep, oh boy. This is from March 4th to the 10th. So obviously the zeros are there on Gafford because he does not shoot threes, but there were some other categories where he performed pretty well at.
Yeah, Andrew, out of all the weeks you want to bring me on to talk about my article, the top buy is relevant.
I know, it should have been last week. Last week you nailed it.
And the sell is obviously Derek Lively had missed a game because of the personal issue, but I don't know what Jason Kidd is doing with his center rotation.
That team in general
really determined. He seems so determined to get Maxi Kleba in there, and I'm guessing it's because he shoots threes, right? But I own Daniel Gafford in one of my more I guess, important leagues. I mean, they're all equally as important, I guess, but one I care about a lot. Um, just I'm really worried about him, and I'm really shaky as far as holding him, because I feel like any night he could play under 15 minutes, and that's just not going to cut it. Obviously, he's playing well right now, so um, the Mavs have a bit of a rough schedule. They do have 4 games this week, but week 21 they have only two. They're only one of 2 teams to have 2 games, along
Yeah.
with the Hornets, right? So
Uh-huh.
Gafford is somebody I'm likely cutting at some point week 21, as well
Right.
as and I actually want to mention real quick. I did say I liked Grant Williams and Micic this week, but with that 2 game week next week, do not under any circumstances carry them in that week 21. But yeah, uh, the Gafford one, I saw him getting dropped in a lot of leagues. I held in the one league. I one league. I had him in because I was fortunate enough to be in a position to where I wasn't really fighting for my playoff life, so I was kind of going to see it through. But the main message behind why I put him in there was because if he's not somebody you can trust to get the minutes, I mean, if you're fighting for your life, it's not worth holding on to.
Mhm.
And that kind of plays into the being aggressive thing, right? Like if he plays 6 minutes next game, he's gone. I'm cutting him. Like
Right.
there's no room to mess around with. Uh, there's no. I don't want to deal with Jason Kidd in the playoffs. So, um, yeah.
That's pretty safe bet. All right, so let's move on to the last part. So the fantasy player of the week is always pretty quick, and then we will wrap up from there. All right, so speaking of Jason Kidd and Daniel Gafford and Derek Lively and the Dallas Mavericks in general, we're going to go on to the Angle Fantasy Basketball Player of the Week. That's going to go to Luka Doncic. So let's go over that 9 category stat line. He shot 51% from the field, 90% from the free throw line. He made 5 threes, 5 threes per game. 37.7 points per game, 10 rebounds, 10 assists per game, 1.3 steals, and 0.7 blocks per game. So bringing it absolutely across the board as a contributor. Well-deserved Player of the Week award for him. But, Luka and the Mavericks, a lot of people, including myself, were really hyping them up after their trade deadline acquisitions. They rattled off, a good amount of wins in a row. But shortly after all of us were talking about and praising the Mavericks, they started to then string together a few losses in a row. There was, displays of really poor defense. As you mentioned, Jason Kidd's toying around with the rotations a lot, toying around with the front court rotation. He must insert Maxi Kleber into the rotation as much as possible. Josh Green doesn't know how to play defense still. There's a lot going on in Dallas,
He's
but
trying.
he's trying. But Luka Doncic just continues to absolutely light up the scoreboards. And when we're looking at it from an MVP perspective, I know obviously what our main focus is here is fantasy, and an MVP award is a real life basketball award. But do you think Luka is someone who's still going to be deserving of an award like this, despite his team not really enduring the success that most MVPs winners teams usually tend to do?
Well, no, but I do want to highlight real quick, just to talk about the fantasy aspect real quick. Just to outline kind of how impressive this stat line is. He ranked number one over the last 7 days over Wemby, and Wemby averaged a double double, 20 points, 11 boards with 2.5 threes and 6.5 blocks
Yeah.
per game, and uh, granted, over a 2 game sample size, but that's how Luka still managed to rank above him
Right. He
there.
broke the streak for Wemby. Wemby was back-to-back player of the week for us the previous 2 weeks. So Luka came in to ruin the three-peat for Wemby this week.
Well, as much as I think the award should strictly be on how good the player is, and I think Luka might be the best player in the league right now. Just there's a lot of talk about narratives and things like that when it comes to MVP voting, and I don't think the Mavs are good enough for Luka to be a serious MVP in the MVP conversation. Although I do want to preface this by saying I'm more of a fantasy basketball guy. As far as when it comes to the MVP race and things like that, I'm not your guy. I don't claim to have the best takes on things like that. I can tell you how he's going to be as a fantasy asset though. He's probably going to be he's going to be a top 3 fantasy asset the rest of the way. That's a pretty
Yeah.
hot take right there. But yeah, I don't think Luka's gonna win MVP. No.
All right. Well, fair enough. And like you mentioned, we are mostly focusing on fantasy basketball here, but the MVP topic is a hot debate this time of year, and it's just interesting to see people's opinions if his individual performances outweighs what the team's going through as a whole, or not.
Jokic.
I agree.
Jokic.
Thank you guys for joining us. We really appreciate it. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. We have all sorts of content that's going to be coming out. Also, be sure to smash that like button. We are going to be back for another weekly recap next Sunday evening, as we also continue to look ahead to more action for fantasy basketball playoffs. Be sure to check out all of our content on anglefantasybasketball.wordpress.com, and we'll catch you later.